Welcome to another week of ReEngage, where we're doing things online or in the virtual world a little bit as we navigate through the season. Hey, if you haven't got involved yet in ReEngage and would like to be involved in one of our groups and get started in that regard, please just email me. It's Brock, B-R-O-C, at hopefellowship.net. We'd love to get you guys connected. And so today we're going to talk about a topic that is just vital to me, to marriage. Just kind of like a straw that stirs the drink type of topic that we have to really pay attention to. And so it's so vital that we take some time to figure this part out, because what I've seen and experienced in my own marriage and working with others is like, if this can't get figured out, a lot of the other stuff just can't really seem to follow along with it. So, but for some people it's easy, but for a lot of us, it's not an area we're naturally good at. So, but we'll get to the topic. That was considered a video tease. Wasn't that exciting? All right. So anyway, but first, I know a lot of you have been clamoring for my social distancing observations. That kind of what sustains you through the week and weeks that we have. Maybe people sharing their stories. You don't hear those social distancing observations. It's been a source of great frustration. So today, no worries. We're back with some social distancing observations. And so these are from my children. My children are aged 21, 19, and 17, so they've got the world figured out. Obviously, they know everything that's cool, and they continue to help me see what is not cool in this world. So in essence, here are their observations for you and me, so that we don't come across as uncool or not cool in this world, okay? So here are a few of their social distancing observations. Some of them are a little obvious. Wearing your mask in your car is not cool. So don't forget to ever take the thing off, because God forbid you would be seen as uncool to a teenager driving by. I discovered that ordering food on an app and then going to the drive-through line and sitting there and then just saying it's an online order, that's not cool. So if there's pickup or something like that, that's fine. But if you're in the line, just order in the line, just to keep you from being uncool from the workers that work there. And I've also discovered from them that on days that you don't work, getting up before noon is very, very uncool. It's almost impossible. And finally, telling dad jokes is really not cool. And I'm sure most of us knew that already. But in the spirit of dad jokes, I wanted to tell one here. And you need to participate because it's kind of fun. And so it's a knock-knock joke. And so I know the expectations are already now quite high because of that preface of a knock-knock joke. But here it is. Ready? Knock-knock. Boo. And why are you crying? It's not that big a deal. So when you have to explain, but it's weird if there's no response because you said boo-hoo. You can see why that's not cool. All right, so today we're going to talk about communication and why that is so important. Communication, again, is a vital, vital issue. And so I had this journey of a few years of realizing that my communication skills need a lot of work, a lot of work. I read a book a few years ago, and I may have mentioned it before in some of these videos, but it was by a guy named Patrick Lencioni. And the title of the book is called 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And in that, he lists, if these things are present, that means your team has some dysfunction in it. And so one of the things he said, if you're a boss and you have an employee that works directly with you or directly beneath you in the org chart, and they don't feel heard, then oftentimes they don't feel valued. And when people don't feel valued, that's when things can start to go awry in the company, in their lives, and your life. So it's the job of the boss, then in summary, to make sure that their direct reports feel heard, that those people can share their true feelings and observations to them without fear of, retribution, I guess would be a good way to say it. And it's the boss's job then to deal with that information. It's the employee's job to share. It's the boss's job then to deal with that information and either implement or say, hey, that's not something we can do right now because you might have a bigger picture type of view. And so in dysfunctional teams, one of the major themes as you look at dysfunctional teams, work environments, is that the employees don't feel like they have any place to share their opinions, their thoughts, or their observations. They don't feel heard. And when those employees don't feel heard, like they can share what's truly inside of their soul, they don't feel valued by that organization. There's other things that might make you feel valued in terms of financial packages, different things, but this is kind of fundamental. If you don't feel heard, you don't feel valued. In summary then, dysfunctional teams struggle with people feeling valued because their perspectives are not valued. And as a boss, we can't control how people communicate to us if we are in that role, but we have to work on how we communicate to them and to make sure that they are feeling heard. And so it's our responsibility to think about others and think, are they feeling heard? And so again, as we talk a lot about ReEngage, one of the beautiful things about this concept of ReEngage is this fundamental idea that we draw a circle around ourselves and realize we can't change other people. We can't change our spouse, but we can change ourselves. And so in a work environment, if people don't feel heard and they don't feel then valued, things can go crazy. But I believe this beautifully translates into our marriage relationships because believe it or not, as I've discovered through 25 years of marriage and working with couples, that if your spouse doesn't feel heard, like they can share what's truly going on inside of them, then typically they don't feel valued. And that's not a good thing in marriage. And so when people feel devalued, they are often hurt, they withdraw from those relationships because why would I stay in a relationship where I don't feel like someone likes me or cares for me or values me? There might be some more complaining, some disgruntled talk. There might be even some more desperate behavior to try to get you to pay attention to them. And relational dysfunction then surely ensues when someone in a relationship doesn't feel valued. So here's some questions for you and I to consider as we think about communication and does our spouse feel valued? The question is, does your spouse feel valued by you in the sense that they are unequivocally heard by you? Can they share their heart and their soul with you? And if they can't, then maybe they're not feeling as valued as we need them to be, and therefore maybe some dysfunction follows. So does your spouse feel valued? And so if we can't really unequivocally answer these questions as yes, they do feel valued, then you and I probably have some work to do. And I know I have some work to do. There's a passage in James that I would love to talk about. That's if there's ever a passage, James 1:19, to memorize. This might be one for us to memorize. It says this: "My dear brothers, and take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." Now, the problem with that, and I wrote this down, is that we are often just the opposite of that. Oftentimes we are slow to listen. Oftentimes we are quick to speak. And oftentimes we are quick to become angry if we feel challenged or attacked. But in James, he's telling us that a way to make someone feel valued is to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And I don't know if that describes a lot of us in a relationship at work, a relationship at home, especially as we talk here today. And then James goes on to say, "For man's anger does not bring about the righteous life that God desires," if we're quick to anger. He says, "Therefore get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you." And so he's saying to us that we can't change necessarily other people, how they respond to us, but we can work on our response. And if we get ourselves right internally where we deal with that anger and that pain, then we can honor God by listening better and being slower to speak. And that's kind of a mark of wisdom. And James says if we do that, we're in a good spot. And then James goes on to say, we'll read through verse 27. He says, "Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says." So do what I'm telling you to do. "Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like a man who looks at his face in a mirror, and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But the man who looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues to do this, not forgetting what he has heard but doing it, he will be blessed in what he does." And so ignoring this advice that James is giving us here, he's saying it's a little foolish. It's kind of like somebody looks in a mirror and walks away and, I don't remember what I look like. It's a little foolish. And so this way of living, leads to blessing. And it honors God if we can live this way. And these last few verses says, this is kind of convicting here for me today especially, "If anyone considers himself religious or wants to honor God, and yet does not keep a tight rein on his tongue, he deceives himself and his religion is basically worthless." So this is something we should really pay attention to. Then verse 27 says, pure religion is that we take care of others and we put others before ourselves. So we've got some soul searching to do here if we can't control our tongues, if our spouses don't feel valued and heard. And so figuring out the pain in our souls is very important for us so that we don't put that pain on other people. And so one of the great ways, according to this passage and what I've discovered in life, is to work on our communication skills is a great way to honor God, is a great way to worship God. If we really want to bring glory to Him, we value other people. All right, so a major principle then of ReEngage and communication is this: The goal of communication, the goal of your communication, the goal of my communication in marriage, the goal is mutual understanding. And what that means is that we hear the perspective of another human being and truly know what they sense, what they feel, what's going on inside of their souls. Because if we don't do that, then they don't feel necessarily valued. So there is a guy that wrote the curriculum, the book that we have for ReEngage. His name is John McGee. And John McGee says a great example of poor communication is that oftentimes when our spouse is speaking, we're not fully listening and trying to hear what they're having to say. He said it's almost like we're back in the Civil War and we've got that Civil War musket. And as they're talking, we're kind of, But what we're really doing is we're kind of, breaking off the gunpowder thing, pouring some gunpowder in there, pouring the pellet in there, jamming it down in there, and listening to them. As soon as they kind of stop, we're ready now because we've been working on our response. We just turn and boom, we fire back at them and hurt and wound people. And so they don't feel valued because we haven't heard what they have to say. And I know that's been a classic example in my marriage over the years as we've struggled with communication. And that was one of the things that ultimately brought us to ReEngage, because our communication was not where it needed to be. So here's how a typical day in our house would work when we struggled with communication. My wife, Alicia, would share her feelings. I would feel responsible for the way she felt, or I feel even attacked by the way she was saying some things. So I'd be working on my Civil War musket, and I would rebut and battle back instantly and kind of telling her how wrong she was and not ever really hearing her perspective. So then she would feel belittled, or as we've been talking about here, devalued. And so she would defend herself or attack back, and she would get her Civil War musket and fight back. We would both raise our voices and start kind of yelling at each other, and we would say a couple hurtful things, be upset, walk away from that, and the other person never felt heard. They felt the other person was truly only interested in their own interest. So zero mutual understanding was taking place in our relationship. So a basic principle, again, drawing the circle, I can't control Alicia, right? I can't. I've tried. It doesn't work very well, and it doesn't ever go well. But what I can control is looking at my negative communication patterns and what I'm doing. And what am I doing that makes my wife feel unheard or devalued? I can't control her, but I can look at me and think, what am I doing that? And so my boy, John Gottman, came up with some things that he identifiers. He calls them the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, or the Four Horsemen of Communication. Like these four horsemen ride into your marriage, if any one of them, they usually have a lot of destructive behavior. And so on our Facebook page, if you'll just search, it's a ReEngage at Hope Fellowship, search Four Horsemen. You'll get a full explanation of those from Carol Fontenot, who's one of our biblical counselors that we use. You can go to our podcast, Mindful Marriage Podcast, and look up for the episode, The Four Horsemen, and we'll explain those to you. You can go to the Gottman Institute and search that up online, and they talk about the Four Horsemen. But these are four communication patterns that are typically available to us. And one of those is not typically hearing someone so they don't feel valued. Is using a lot of negative language when we talk to them, like you always or you never or whatever, so inflammatory language. So how can we get rid of that? Not making the other person feel valued. Sometimes our posture in receiving communication, they call it stonewalling, is so bad that we kind of turn into a stone wall and they don't feel like they're getting through to us. And typically when people can't get through to us, they battle a little harder to get through, or they give up. And so it's our job to look at those negative communication patterns and think, what can I do to get a little bit better? So I'd really encourage you to use one of those resources, either our Facebook page, the Mindful Marriage Podcast, or the Gottman Institute, to look up those four horsemen and ask yourself the question, which of these are riding into my marriage, into my life, because I can control me, do I need to get rid of? So a little homework, I guess, for you to do that this week. So what do you do with this information? What do I do with this information? Again, what are the communication skills I need to make sure that my spouse feels valued? By being heard. And if they're not being heard, dysfunction typically ensues. So this week, homework, listen to those things, figure out the four horsemen, figure out some negative communication patterns you have. And some of them might just be obvious, like when my wife's talking to me, I kind of turn up the volume on the TV, or a really bad thing to do is I used to do this, like, hey, get to the point a little faster. I would recommend not doing that. That didn't work very well in my marriage, and so don't do that. And so, but looking at some communication patterns. Am I attacky? Do I raise my voice too much? Do I never let my spouse fully share? And so here's an exercise you might do as well. Make that list of all the things you need to improve. And then kind of look at a model that kind of goes through my brain a little bit. It's called the listener-speaker model. When someone's speaking, you're the listener. Don't try to be the person that rebuts or guides or anything. You're asking questions. You're trying to fully hear their perspective. So let them fully speak before you respond. So basically, we're putting down the musket and trying to hear. And so we're asking questions so we can gain their perspective. Because oftentimes, once we hear their perspective, it gives us empathy, and a lot of times we're even on the same page. So you're asking questions. You're asking, what is their pain point here? What is causing them to hurt? Trying to figure out what that is. And your goal solely when they're communicating is to gain their perspective. What are they trying to say? What is their hurt? And then when it's your turn to speak, you work on some of those Gottman techniques that are in the Four Horsemen that we've talked about and kind of go from there. And so again, seriously, check out those Four Horsemen topics. Learn about that. Identify which ones you need to work on. Typically, unfortunately, as I watch those videos and listen to those things, I need to work on all four of them. But those are things that can destroy our marriage. And if we don't have good communication, it can really hurt our marriage. And so it's a call for us to really work on those things. So good luck this week as you work on communication, and take some time to really look at yourself and say, what can I do? It's not my job to let the employee figure this out, but what can I do to make sure they're heard? And especially in our marriage relationship, what can I do to make sure that my spouse is feeling heard and therefore feeling valued? And when someone feels valued, things usually go a little bit better. Thanks for your time. Keep working on those marriages. Keep seeking the Lord. Keep growing that relationship. Keep working on you. And we'll continue to move in the right direction. Thanks, guys.